Well, we want to turn to another issue here, critically important issue. That's the so-called government efficiency, DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency in the United States. And what I would really consider it sort of a gutting of the government, but obviously huge implications for all people, especially working class people here in the U.S. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Dayen, who's the executive editor at the American Prospect, to discuss this. David, as always, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And, it almost feels like there's a little bit of a fog of war around DOGE in terms of like what they're actually doing, because they're putting out all these numbers. They have this dashboard and the whole nine. And, I know we don't have all the information, but is there any sense that what they're doing actually is saving a lot of money somehow, that is making the government more efficient? Or is it really what I think a lot of us feel like a smoke and mirrors thing?
And the short answer is no. And everything they're doing is kind of the opposite of their intentions or stated intentions. Keep in mind that initially during the campaign, Elon Musk said, I think we can get $2 trillion out of the federal government in 1 year. Then during the transition, he downgraded that to $1 trillion. Then it turned out the part of the budget he was looking at, which is discretionary non-defense spending. Defense spending has been no part of DOGE. That part isn't even $1 trillion by itself. So if you would cancel all of that, it wouldn't get you to $1 trillion. And then just a couple of weeks ago, he said, I think we're on track in fiscal year 2026 for $150 billion. And that's what's on their dashboard. So now we're a tiny fraction of what was initially promised. And that number is completely misleading. Half of the things in the dashboard are money that wasn't going to be spent anyway, or distortions of actual funding. And it goes down even further. In a couple weeks, we're going to see a bill in Congress that rescinds spending that DOGE has canceled. And that number is $9 billion. So we went from $2 trillion to $9 billion. And most of the things they've done in terms of upending the lives of federal workers and, eliminating things like call centers and eliminating in-person or reducing the staff for in-person visits at Social Security Administration, all this has done is make government more inefficient, not the opposite.
Yeah, there's so much to say about all of that. And one thing I want to kind of focus in on is maybe a smaller agency a lot of people don't know. But, you think efficiency, you think good things. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is one of the most targeted. And it seems like, just from what I've read, that they were actually delivering like quite a nice, return on investment for Americans. But now they're being targeted as inefficient and terrible, which makes you think maybe there's another agenda.
CFPB has delivered more money to Americans in consumer relief than it has spent in their entire history. It has delivered about $21 billion in relief, and it hasn't spent nearly that much throughout its history, which only began in 2010 after the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act. So what has been attempted repeatedly is to fire essentially the entire staff, 90% of the staff at CFPB. This has been blocked on multiple occasions by federal judges, but clearly, there isn't a sort of a spirit of consumer protection happening right now at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And what that does is it leaves individuals who are navigating this economy at the mercy of scam artists and predatory lenders and things like that. And so CFPB, I think, is a perfect example of DOGE and also, the Project 2025 folks, people like Russ Vought, who is the head of the Office of Management and Budget and currently the acting director of CFPB. All of these efforts to slash the government, it's being done more in service to allow banks free reign over the economy, for example, rather than any sort of efficiency initiative.
Well, it speaks to something that, you were alluding to, too, in your first answer, which is what seems to me to be a bit of a logical fallacy that they're putting out. That sort of like efficiency is the same thing as reduction in money and personnel, as if like that's the only way to be efficient is to have less people and to spend less money. But it seems like CFPB, the IRS, you almost feel like they need actually more money to be efficient. At least that's how it looks like to me.
Absolutely the case. The return on investment for the IRS is something like $12 for every dollar put into auditing. The federal government workforce totals about between 2 and 3% of the entire federal budget. That's it. You could cut the workforce in half and you'd still only be dealing with 1% of the federal budget. Most of the federal budget goes out in programs, things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these vital programs that people need. You're not going to get any kind of budgetary impact by just cutting staff. And what you're going to do is you're going to cut like procurement officers that save the government money, make sure the government doesn't get ripped off when it purchases things. You're going to cut staff that, is regulatory staff that, helps protect the public. You're going to cut IRS staff that tries to make sure people pay their fair share of taxes. So it is a completely self-destructive kind of action that these Doge boys are taking.
Well, I'm so glad you said that too, because you think these people are making like millions of dollars or something working for the government when people are really, just average working people. And, it brings me also to another context here. So maybe sort of a two-part thing about how we even view federal workers. I mean, one, the idea that they're just sort of like, bureaucrats sitting there collecting a paycheck. And when maybe I'm biased, I lived in DC for 15 years. I think most federal workers are there because they want to help people, but also that it's like just Washington, DC, and that this will have no impact anywhere else in the country when there's federal workers all over the place, Kansas City, other places. So I don't know. It just feels like there's also this total propaganda effort against federal workers that is just not based in reality.
100% correct. Federal workers can make a lot more in the private sector, so they're there for a mission-driven reason. And federal workers include your park ranger. Federal workers include the nurse at the VA that is taking care of you. Federal workers are spread out, as you say, all around the country. And federal workers include scientists who are trying to find cures or various innovations. So, it has certainly been an effort to demonize the federal worker as part of a larger project to demonize government itself and make sure it's, government is hobbled in many ways.
No, I think that's such an important point. Actually, it's sparking so much that you brought it up, that so many of these government agencies really are rooted in the New Deal and the civil rights movement. I mean, the idea of the expansion of government really seems to be like, for progressive people, at least in America, really at the heart of a social vision, not just like, we want to have 5 or 6 more people.
And there hasn't been an expansion. In fact, government employment has been rather flat. If you look at a total percentage of the overall workforce, government workers were about 4% of the overall workforce in 1960. And today, they're close to 2% of the overall workforce. Government employment has been generally flat for the last 40, 50 years, while the population that the government serves has increased by tens of millions of people. So it's simply all based on a false premise that we have this runaway bureaucracy in the country. That is not the case. Government has been generally shrinking. We've had multiple efforts to scale back the size of government in the 1980s with Reagan, with privatization in the 2000s or 1990s with Clinton and the Reinventing Government initiative. And when you scale back government, what you end up doing, and I alluded to it a second ago, is you end up contracting out government functions to private companies. And that ends up costing more money in the long run because you have to add in that layer of profit. And it is not the case that those entities are any more efficient. In fact, they're often more wasteful because any kind of waste rebounds to their bottom line. So it's really a fantasy notion that we can shrink the size of government without ending up costing us more money in the long run.
I mean, the costs seem, and we've talked about this, throughout the interview so far, but just to put a fine point on it, I mean, some of the potential costs and outcomes here feel like they could be catastrophic. I mean, to, senior citizens, I mean, even like, the hurricane readiness. I mean, it feels that we're right on the precipice potentially with these sorts of cuts that, are just slash and burn that, the average person could be facing not just like a small reduction in services, but that we could see some real problems for millions of people.
100%. What you're seeing right now is cutting into the bone of the federal government, when you are hollowing out the regional offices where Social Security Administration offices are located and people have longer wait times to get their money, you're really cutting benefits effectively, right? If you don't have access to actually sign up, your benefits are being cut. And some people are completely vulnerable and can't afford to have that happen. If you're cutting resources like at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this is the organization that puts up weather balloons so that you know that there's a hurricane on the way. If you don't know that's on the way, there could be more death, more damage, and more destruction. These are just a couple examples of really basic functions of the federal government being hollowed out by Elon Musk and his band of merry boys. It's really debilitating, and I think what it shows in the aftermath, and hopefully we don't have something catastrophic happen, but it shows the importance of government. Why we need government in these various ways to deal with things like food inspection. Those inspections have been cut recently, to deal with just sort of basic protections for the public. And in their absence, everybody's more at risk.
One of the things I also just want to raise here is, the pushback against this. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any signs of hope here. I mean, we've seen tons of people all across the country coming out in the streets. And of course, it's, just a start, I guess. But I wonder how you're reacting, seeing what we've seen from the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, the Hands Off, all the different efforts that are coming together.
I think it's absolutely had an impact. I mean, Elon Musk is probably going to leave the government very soon, and I don't think that would have happened. He's even said that he's tired of being called out by the left, and that has forced him to retreat back into Tesla and his other businesses. I think that there's been sort of a two-pronged strategy. Obviously, there's been a lot of legal cases that have pushed back against DOGE cuts and restored them in many instances. The rollback of the firing of 25,000 probationary employees, the rollback of the mass firing at CFPB, and a host of other things, including the protections on data, the government data that DOGE has been trying to get its hands on. So that's sort of the inside strategy, right? The legal strategy. And then on the outside, you've seen millions of people take to the streets saying, whether it's Hands Off or the Fighting Oligarchy Tour or whatever, showing that there is a constituency here for stopping this kind of destruction and hollowing out of the federal government. So I think those things work kind of in concert in the court of public opinion. And we've seen, Trump's approval rating sink. We've seen Musk's approval rating go way, way down. He's trying to, now back off and leave the government. So I do think it's had an impact.
Mm-hmm. Well, thankfully, we also have the American Prospect out there to help us sort through it all, doing great coverage on all of these things, and also some real fine-grained stuff on tariffs as well. And David, we always appreciate you being willing to join us here on the Freedom Side.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me.